I'm going to start now. Hello, everyone. My name is Maria Young. I'm the coordinator of both SHEP Earth Aware and Green Spaces for Health. And on behalf of these two organisations and Cork Healthy Cities, Cork Chamber, the Environmental Research Institute and the Cork Environmental Forum, we welcome you to this, our first session of the series, Greening Our City. The schedule for today is I will shortly hand you over to Frank Dorr of SHEP Earth Aware, who will formally introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Marcus Collier. Marcus will present for approximately 30 minutes. Our moderator, Denise Cahill, coordinator of Cork Healthy Cities, will introduce Paula Cogan from Cork Chamber and Paul Bolger from the ERI, who will each give a brief response to this series, and the session will then open to questions from the audience. The questions will be facilitated through the chat box, and for those of you not familiar with this, just click on the chat icon located at the lower centre of your screen. A panel will open up where you can type and enter your question. The moderator will direct it then to Marcus. The best way of viewing this presentation is to click on the speaker view on the top right corner of your screen. By the way, you can start posing questions as Marcus gives his presentation. Please keep your questions succinct. We may not get to all of them, but we will do our best. And just so you are aware, we are recording this session for the archives and none of the audience will appear on the recording. About the series Greening Our City. We will host a talk on the third Tuesday of every month at this time, 2:30 p.m. On October the 20th, our guest is world-renowned public health expert, Dr. Trevor Hancock, and the title of his talk is Healthy One Planet Communities, Creating Planetary, Community and Personal Health. On November the 24th, our guest speaker is Cynthia Nikitin from New York. Cynthia is an expert in using placemaking to create safer cities and is the author of one of the first books on transportation and livable communities. The series will resume in January 2021. Now is an opportune time to talk, strategize and act on the greening of Cork. The unique experiences of the COVID-19 lockdown has brought the discussion on transitioning Cork to a sustainable green city into the mainstream. The report of the recent public survey that Cork Chamber conducted showed that connected public transport, cycleways and green spaces are the top 3 priorities of the people of Cork. The Cork City Development Plan 2022 to 28 that is currently at draft stage gives us, the citizens of Cork, the opportunity to effect change and influence our future. How do we make the transition from a grey to a green city? Ongoing research about the connection between green spaces and our mental, physical health and well-being and our cognitive development tell us that where we live and how we live is becoming increasingly linked to our health outcomes and quality of life. How do we build resilient communities and prepare for climate change? How do we achieve equitable change for people of any gender, race or background? How will we ensure that living in Cork is conducive to happiness as well as productivity? How are we going to protect the natural world, our fragile biodiversity on which we depend? The purpose of this series is to address these questions and many more, and in doing so to generate action on the ground. We are inviting all who participate here today to consider how can we collectively achieve change. Knowing that no single organisation can do this on its own, the idea of this series is to encourage active collaboration between community groups, academics, the business community, the city council and other strategic players. Hoping to inspire action, one of the first things we want to do is to compile a directory of the many organisations in Cork involved in sustainability and greening projects. With your help, we will put together this resource, making it available to everyone to encourage networking and the exchange of ideas. To give an indication of what is already happening on the ground, we will invite various groups over the course of this series to say a few words about their work. Beginning with Green Spaces for Health today. Our work is mainly, though not exclusively, based in the South Parish area of Cork. One of our latest projects is the growing of food in a local housing estate. This starts in November and is a collaboration between residents of the estate, Green Spaces for Health, and Kinsale Permaculture College. We also steward Park Owen, a former cemetery off Quaker Road, which until recently was a place local people didn't access because of antisocial behaviour. We started a weekly volunteer gardening group that has over 2 years planted native trees, a native hedgerow, engaged in rewilding, and continues to plant for and record the biodiversity of the area. During the COVID lockdown, this park became an oasis for families with children who don't have gardens or areas to play in. Older people continue to come here to walk in safety, and people of all ages now regularly use the park. We plan to continue outdoor health events here throughout the winter, including our weekly community Tai Chi classes. With St. John's Central College, we installed a beehive on the college rooftop in May 2019 to highlight the importance of pollinators. This continues to have a very positive impact on the college and the community. We founded an eco-congregation in St. Finbar South Chapel, and this group is concerned with applying local action to issues of global justice. Green Spaces for Health run free Reconnecting with Nature courses every year at the Nanonagle Place, based on the work of eco-philosopher Joanna Macy. In partnership with the School of Biological, Earth and Environmental Sciences, UCC, we're conducting a tree audit of the parish, and thus far we have mapped, identified and measured over 700 trees. Finally, in demonstrating the circular economy, we run a waste paper collection, transporting it to a local business in the marina where the paper is converted into green insulation. Green Spaces for Health was founded by Cork Healthy Cities, the Cork Environmental Forum and the Lantern Project at Nanonagle Place, and is funded by Healthy Ireland. For more information, check out our website at corkhealthycities.com/greenspacesforhealth. Thank you for listening, and I now hand you over to Frank Dorr to introduce Marcus Collier.
Thank you very much indeed, Maria. And I want to add my welcome to everyone who's joining us today. As Maria said, I'm with the group called SHEP Earth Aware. And for those of you who aren't very familiar with that, the name SHEP might be puzzling. So just to let you know, it stands for the Social and Health Education Project. That's a community development and education organization that has been working in Cork for going on 50 years now, and is now active throughout much of Munster as well. SHEP Earth Aware is a part of that now, with a special focus on raising awareness of earth-related issues through courses, talks, films, conferences, all sorts of activities on our own and preferably in collaboration with others. I'm very honoured and really delighted to be able at last to introduce Professor Marcus Collier. I say at last because it's the best part of 3 years actually since a few of us in SHEP Earth Aware learned about Professor Collier's work and resolved that we had to get him to speak in Cork. Though he has scores of academic publications, what drew our attention especially was his work as coordinator of the Connecting Nature Network. And he'll be telling us a lot more about that during his talk, I think. We were really attracted to the way in which this seems to link research and practical action, and in the way in which it brings together local authorities, businesses, academics, and community groups in a way that seemed a really helpful way forward. The delay in getting Professor Collier to Cork was not his fault. He responded most generously and helpfully when we did get to invite him. The delay really was because we wanted to make sure that we could gather an audience that would include people from all those sectors that Connecting Nature works with. So we were very glad that this partnership of 6 organizations has come together to put on this talk and indeed this whole series. And we're really delighted at the numbers registering for the talk and at the mix of people who have joined, who come from all those various sectors, community groups, business, academia, and City Hall. Professor Collier's own listing of his areas of expertise suggests how relevant his work might be to greening our city and how much we might be able to learn from him. So I'll just list a few that are listed on his website. He's an expert in urban ecology, social ecological systems, landscape and restoration ecology, environmental policies, and collaborative governance. And he says he's also very interested in novel ecosystem theory and the potential of novel ecosystems for rewilding urban areas as well as urban communities. I found personally that very hopeful reference to rewilding the communities as well as the areas. I'm hoping that even at my area, that at my age, maybe a little bit of rewilding can happen even for the likes of me. So in any case, I'm excited and really delighted that Professor Collier is here with us to share some of his vision. And it's an honor for me to hand over to him now.
Well, thank you very much, Frank. We appreciate that very kind introduction, and Maria as well. Thank you so much for that rather very interesting précis of what is currently happening in Cork. Is a lot more than we're led to believe happening. I'm going to talk about a project. Oops, beg your pardon. I'm going to talk about a project called Connecting Nature. It's essentially a innovation action within Horizon 2020, which I'll talk about in a second. But what I want to do is talk about nature-based solutions. And this is maybe not for everybody. I'm just looking at the people who are coming in as participants. Some of you know me, some of you have seen this presentation before, even parts of it anyway. But you know, we're talking about this idea of nature as a way of delivering solutions in cities and regreening cities. So it's a program, and Connecting Nature is a project that is essentially aimed at doing that. I'm going to propose that the format and the structure of Connecting Nature and the types of things that we're doing, whilst we're doing it at a global and a European and a global level, could be very easily replicated at a local level, at a city level. So judging by the assemblages of people I see here, that there's definitely the room and the space and the interest here for doing that. So a little bit of background here. It's a Horizon 2020 project, which means it's a European funded project. Its goal is essentially to innovate with nature, to co-create or to design mechanisms for building resilience in cities, whether that's actual physical resilience to climate change, but also social and even cultural resilience. And in doing that, also provide economic opportunities for realizing what we think is a win-win scenario of renaturing cities and also providing employment and building opportunities for employment. We've got 30 partners in 16 different countries. I'm not going to go through all of the partners. And we also have created hubs in Brazil, China, Korea, and the Caucasus. Georgia and Armenia are our main one. I'm going to come back to that Caucasus one a little later in the project, because you can participate or sit in on some of the events that we're doing for them. We're in the middle of it at the moment, but you can eavesdrop in on various webinars that are happening. One is happening very, very soon. It's a collaboration between 2 schools in Trinity College as well, which was a little bit more difficult than I had thought about. So it's the School of Natural Sciences, which is where I am, which is geology, geography, zoology, and botany. I don't particularly fit into any one of those categories. I'm kind of hovering between them all. And also the School of Business. And in the School of Business, we started the Center for Social Innovation, as a new way of looking at how we develop innovations not in Ireland, but in the world. And the total budget is just shy of 12 million, and we've been given by the European Commission 11.4 million over 5 years. There are about 200 people. That's just some of us at our kickoff meeting. And for everyone you see there, there's 2 or 3 other people in the various teams in different locations around Europe. And there we have some of them in Ireland, and so on. And there's an interesting mix of which is something I think we could, you have at the, you said at the outset, this, Maria, about this mixture of different, or sorry, Frank mentioned this mixture of different communities you want to try and get into the room. The project is made of about the largest number of partners would be cities. We have 3 cities that we classify as front-runner cities. These are sort of cities that have a little bit more advanced in the area of nature-based solutions. That is Glasgow in the UK, Poznan in Poland, and Genk, not Ghent, Genk in Belgium. And we have a series of follower cities and multiplier cities where they're looking to scale up some of their nature-based approaches. And we have a sort of a mentor-mentee relationship between cities. So the front-runner cities are providing expertise and are also providing experiential knowledge to those other cities. And what we're finding at the moment is, in fact, it's almost working the other way around. Some of the follower cities also have got experiences that that they were wanting to share. The next grouping of partners will be small and medium enterprises. Some of these are enterprises that are specifically designed and constructed are basically environmental businesses. Others are involved in the process of working with communities and collaborating with communities, developing collaborative relationships between cities and communities to do different types of things, in this case be nature-based solutions. And then the third area is academics at different universities, including ourselves. But whilst we're all working together, sometimes we're working bilaterally or all together, it really is at the core of the whole project are the different communities in those cities. So we rely very, very heavily on the different types of stakeholders, the different types of communities of interest. So they be business communities of interest or local communities of interest, communities of knowledge, different types of people in cities who would be able to bring different things to the table. And it's really from them that we're developing a lot of our ideas with the cities and with the academics and with the small and medium enterprises. So I've been mentioning what nature-based solutions. So what the hell am I talking about? I'm sure some of you are saying. There's a definition by the European community where nature-based solutions are classed as actions that are inspired and supported by nature, which are cost-effective, simultaneously providing environmental, social, and economic benefits to help build resilience. So it's a lot there and a lot to take in. And in fact, we recently redefined it a little bit to say that those actions that are not helping to boost biodiversity or ecosystem services in cities cannot be called a nature-based solution. So it's a little bit of a theoretical area of discussion, but what we're talking about is essentially innovating with nature. And I sometimes describe this, and some people might not particularly like this phrase, but it's way of thinking about nature as a form of technology. It may not necessarily be something that you could buy and sell, but it's a form of technology. It's doing a task for us. And in that line, its nature-based solutions are rather similar to the way solar panels were maybe 20 years ago, which were very rare and rather an exclusive thing to have. And now you can buy them in Woodies and B&Q, and they're very common. So nature-based solutions are at the stage where it is still not a very common phrase to be using, but it's going to get more and more attention as time goes on. There are different types of solutions, so those that deal with climate issues, like solutions to deal with heat. I'm going to talk about heat, water, biodiversity. Other environmental issues which are extremely important in cities, such as noise, dust, and air quality, which can have extremely negative effects on people's quality of life and therefore their productivity and their concentration levels and so on, and of course their health and well-being. Interestingly, nature-based solutions and innovations that come from that, we're looking at dealing with tackling things like social cohesion, health and well-being, as I just mentioned. And as we are talking about today, the idea of regreening our communities, of rewilding, rediscovering, as we did during the first, the 6 months that have just passed. We've seen a significant number of people discovering or rediscovering the wealth of nature that there is, even in their, you know, in their garden wall or sticking out of their chimney pot or something like that. You see a lot of comments that people are recognizing that they're recognizing nature. They're commenting on birds. I don't know, the dolphin in the Lee, or whatever animal was wandering up there. Or they notice a lot of these things that they may not have noticed before and commenting about it. But what that's doing is it's telling us something. It's telling us that communities and individuals value this more than we probably thought of. So the nature-based approach is a way of realizing and bringing people on board in the process, the co-creation process of regreening our cities. And so that's an interesting take-home message for this presentation, because at the core of regreening is the wealth of experiential knowledge in communities, but also the significant desire of communities, as was mentioned earlier on, for example, who don't have access to a garden or nearby park, to bring nature into their communities. Nature-based solutions is not things like biomimicry, like copying nature, like developing a technology that imitates wings or membranes and so on. It's purely actually bringing actual nature. Now we can discuss what type of nature we're talking about here. We're bringing greenery back into cities, and the way we're doing it is to offer an opportunity for that to be helping us to deal with some of the other environmental issues we have. Just, I know this is a lot here, and before you ask, I've made this presentation available, so it'll be downloadable at the end of the presentation. And these are all live links to the various different projects that are going on, funded by Horizon 20 in Europe, some of them outside Europe, but mostly in Europe. There are around, well, you can see them all there. These projects, Connecting Nature is a group of 4 there, and there's others. There's in September, just now started, there's another few nature-based solution projects kicking off. One of them there, Go Green Roots, is also being led, a larger consortium than my one, led by Tig McIntyre and the University of Limerick, who may or may not be on this call. And he is, so this will be another Irish-led nature-based solution project. So effectively there are 2 large nature-based solution projects, and the other one there, Varsities, I think Louth County Council is one of the partners in that. So there is a beginning of an interest in Ireland on the European stage. The European Commission has significantly invested in the nature-based approach. So just out of Horizon 2020 alone, between 2017 and 2024, there around 240 million euro is being invested in different types of projects. In the Green Deal that is being announced by Ursula von der Leyen recently in the European Commission, and also at the Horizon Europe, which is a successor to Horizon 2020, there will be probably the same amount or possibly even more. So for anyone who's listening and is a early career researcher, early career practitioner, or someone is looking to develop innovations in this space, there is an awful lot happening, and there will be more happening. So I put all of this there so you can link to them, and I will talk about some of the innovations out of Connecting Nature, and I'll send a link in the chat as well. And here's what essentially we're talking about. We have things like bioswales, which is a slight dip in the pavement there in our partner city of Glasgow, for intercepting and attenuating runoff from rainwater before it enters the stormwater system. We have living exterior walls. You might be familiar, you might have seen them occasionally, and they're becoming more and more important. We have other large water attenuation ponds, interior living walls, in case you're wondering what that wall is. That's the inside of Bord Bia here in Dublin. That's was meant to be planted in the shape of the globe. That's Russia in red, and rather cheekily, that's Africa and South America towards us there. But of course, plants do what plants do, and they all grew together. So the Earth has become a little bit, plate tectonics has sped up a little bit on that wall there. But that's a very interesting experiment. And the door, by the way, is made of mosses, so they're not actually in any particular substrate. So there's a lot of innovations out there. There's a lot of ideas of how you can regreen a city, but also have the co-benefits that come along with that, which include the cleaning our air and so on. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about these and some photographs as well. When we're talking about nature-based solutions, the main area that we tend to think about, and the main area that a lot of people think about, are the most visible ones. Those that are on buildings, either living roofs or living walls. That is the botany department in Trinity College, where I don't have an office, unfortunately. But I'd like to draw your attention to in the central image there, the building behind, which is our new business school. And we see a nature-based solution, a test one, the only one of its kind, testing how nature can be, there's almost half a hectare of land, maybe an acre of land, given over to nature and biodiverse nature, basically hanging on the side of the building, providing shade into the building. So there's still a lot of new things coming out. And in the foreground, the planting area near the cement, that's a rain garden to intercept water and nutrient running off instead of going into the stormwater system. So we have this in plenty of places, and we have experimental ideas that go with that. And you know, what we're really talking about is in cities where we're talking about new nature-based solutions. But of course, there are, of course, legacy nature-based solutions. All our street trees, all our parks, all our in fact, in many ways, most cities and the design of most cities, you know, parks emerged as a solution to things like, well, in fact, pandemics in some cases, and other forms of social change. So trees were already mentioning, or were already providing things for us, doing stuff for us, protecting us from strong winds or intercepting noise, or good old-fashioned sheltering us from the one or two very strong sunny days we get every year. And allotments and other urban green spaces were providing other forms of social benefits. And so we do know that these things exist, and there's a lot of discussion. I'm sure it's happening in Cork, it's happening in every city, about retrofitting some of our parks to make them more biodiverse, to make them more age-friendly, to make them more disability-friendly, and to make them more multifunctional. And this is to be welcomed. So we of course could class all of this as a nature-based solution, but I like just to think that they're already there. There's no point in talking about what we already have. From now on, we need to start thinking that every time we do something in a city that is essentially an open space strategy that involves greening or some other form of public space, we need to look at what co-benefits it can provide for us. What are the additional things that can happen? So by putting in a green area, it has also got to be an area that could take a certain amount of flooding, for example. And I'm sure this is one of the priorities in Cork, as it is in many cities in Ireland and Britain, with respect to the models of the way the climate will be changing for the next God knows how long. But when we're talking about newer nature-based solutions, we're talking about living walls, living roofs, rain gardens. Some of you might be familiar with sustainable urban drainage systems. Others might be more familiar with constructed wetlands, for example. These are very specifically designed nature-based technology. And it's essentially a way of having our cake and eating it. Everybody wants more from nature, everybody wants more of nature. And so this is a good way of bringing more nature into the city. And I like the name you chose, bringing life into the cities. When we were coming up with a sort of a catchy logo for Connecting Nature, as you can see at the bottom, was bringing cities to life, bringing life into cities. And I really like that phrase, because it is a two-way thing. It is a dual process of not only are you regreening your city, but you're also regreening the people in the city and bringing a better quality of life and better opportunities for a better quality of life in our cities. So there's a lot of ways, a lot of opportunities, insulation from heat and cold, creating of habitats, improving our air quality. increasing our amenity space. And one place that we don't tend to look at in Ireland is our roofs. Other countries have a lot of amenity space on roofs, and we don't tend to. But some of our newer buildings can do that. Increasing the lifespan of our roof, and there's other potential opportunities or potential benefits to having a nature-based approach, because if you think about infrastructure, grey infrastructure, built infrastructure, it tends to depreciate over time. It tends to run down, needs to be repaired, there's cracks, you need to upgrade it and so on. Whereas green infrastructure or nature-based solutions, as I like to think, appreciates over time. It gets better, it grows, it brings in new things that we didn't particularly think of. And so nature can actually have it is also needs to be renovated and managed the same way as a roof needs to be done, but on a much more different timescale, and possibly using different types of innovations and thereby different types of companies that could do this. So there's again, the opportunity there. I'm going to go through just a couple of these and just say where we once were and where we're coming to now at this stage. Most people will be familiar with the idea of a green roof, which would have been made up until relatively recently of sedum, which is a type of succulent. It's a plant that can grow in cities. In other words, it can tolerate extreme amounts of heat and extreme amounts of rain, and it can take the odd frost and a lot of snow as well. So it's a pretty rugged plant. And so we can regreen our cities almost instantly, our roofs anyway, with sedum. I do use the word green roof because sedum actually goes red a lot. And this is the Lidl, the top of Lidl here in Dublin. We were at a colleague took a photograph from Dublin City Council and sent it to me yesterday. And which I dread calling it a green roof. In fact, the church in the distance is more of a green roof because of the copper than they plant. But anyway, but this is a very simple form of technology. You can get it in the shops now. You can buy it so they can be put on top of your roof. Doesn't require any extra structure, doesn't require a tremendous amount of care. And in fact, it does flower and has a certain amount of biodiversity value. But just like a football pitch or any sort of lawn, it's one species, and therefore its biodiversity element is not brilliant. However, its aesthetic element and noise and pollution and all that, as well as its insulation quality, is really good. So where we're going at now is we're moving to a more biodiverse approach. This is the top, on my screen, the top left picture is that of the conference center in Vancouver. And the one on the right you will be more familiar with, which was one of the testing sites that we had in my previous project, the Tourist project, where we were given one of the roofs in the London Olympic Park to create a biodiverse roof. And in fact, I'll talk later on about dual technologies. We have bio-solar roof. We've got solar solutions, energy solutions, and we also have a green solution there. So we're at the stage now where we're trying to experiment with different types of living roofs, each providing the same amount or even better in terms of insulation quality and noise proofing, soundproofing, but also opportunities for biodiversity. And once we start getting into this area, we start to see humans poking their nose into the frame and saying, well, you know, it's so nice. I'd like to have a little look up here. I wouldn't mind visiting this. And so there's been an additional roof. Sorry, this is just a quick shot of the different types of experiments we were doing. Sorry for the quality of that image. It seems to have come out poorly. The different types of experiments we were doing in order to test different types of building substrates in order to increase the opportunities for using roofs. And so we start to see roofs now being used the same way as allotments would be used. I'll show you a picture a little later on from one that I found in Cork. So there's a demand from the community. These are not in Ireland, by the way, just to let you know, obviously, the weather's too nice, I think, in some of them. But what we're seeing here is a brilliant use of space. Currently in Paris, they're building an urban rooftop farm, which would be completely commercial. And there are quite a few examples of commercial rooftop farming, going market gardening, as it used to be called, and being quite successful, both in the terms of the community use and the use of in terms of customer satisfaction and security of supply for the businesses below, like the grow it yourself people have been promoting in Ireland, but also for the benefit of other types of users, such as some living roof gardens are used in therapy for bringing people to de-stress and to allow staff members to during the lunch break to have more green in their lives. And we're beginning to understand there's an awful lot more about the well-being and beneficial effects of access to green infrastructure, specifically tactile, touching it, actually physically touching nature, working with the soil. Those of you who are from a farming background will be nodding your head, of course, but not many people will have that experience on a daily basis, especially if you live in an apartment. So this is a new experience for a lot of people. And so roofs provide this wonderful, and at the same time, they're still doing the same job. They're still capturing carbon. They're keeping the noise down. They've got a certain amount of water attenuation and so on. So they can keep a lot of their roof there, and they can be matched onto other nature-based solutions on the ground, such as rain gardens, in order to keep the water and anything that runs off more pure as it ends up going into the stormwater system. And then this technology has been adapted by other types of innovators in this space, some bicycle sheds, and currently I know of different companies that are making these types of shelters, living shelters, for things like supermarket trolley stations in the middle of car parks, you know, those ones where you dump your supermarket trolley before you get in your car, and things like that, as well as bus shelters and other types of things. And you can see they've also incorporated other types of biodiversity encouraging elements, such as the bee holes and so on. The bus shelter on the bottom, you'll see, also incorporates a solar panel. So again, we see the dual purpose or the multi-purpose approach for a nature-based solution. And these are much more easier to get, and they are almost, at least until we start to get that economy of scale going, they're getting close to being on parity with the types of bus shelters or other types of shelters that we will see in other locations. So already the nature-based solution approach is starting to come down, and from the elitist platform that it was, only those who could afford it could do it, and now we're starting to see parks and other types of local authority departments using them, and they're now being made available commercially from flat packs and so on. So it's very quickly being adapted as people started to recognize, yeah, I kind of like that idea. I wouldn't mind one of them in my garden or school or local park. Again, just to go back to what I was saying about combining technologies, this really speaks to those countries that don't have the problem of rain that we do, but do have a plethora of sunshine, where they can avail of the vast resources of sun. But even here, there's the attempt to try and make biosolar roofs a reality. The pictures of the very, very warm at the top right there is clearly the biodiversity is struggling to get a foothold there because it's quite a warm location, whereas here in London in the central image, it's thriving quite well. Just want to point out that those purple plants that are there were not planted by anybody. So a lot of the seeds arrived in afterwards. And where we left some standing water on this roof, we also found frogs. It's 6 stories high, and there's only one door onto it, and only 2 people have a key. So we're not quite sure how the frogs got out there. We're finding it very interesting from a scientific point of view. So we do see where nature is given a chance, it will take it, and it will do its merry thing, which is wonderful from a regreening point of view. Just going to go through a few more things. I'm looking at the time here. So we have the living walls, you know, in terms of, there's quite a lot of them out there. The best example we have is this hotel here in London. It's the bottom right-hand corner. And just to, on the other side, just look at some thermal imagery we took of that hotel to show that the thermal insulation of the living structure, really, you can see the redness of where the heat is getting out, where there's no green, and the green, the blue, the dark blue areas, the colder areas, even on the little facade thing that's there protecting the interior. And we have now got a cost benefit analysis of that, and it's very, very much making its own. By the way, that whole system was watered by rainwater, and only on a rare occasion does the owner of the hotel actually have to top that up. So it's very neat little process, and it's aesthetically very pleasing as well to the residents nearby. Now, the living wall sort of design process has gone on at a great pace, and now we're looking at very exaggerated and very exciting types of walls. But what I want to just point out here, like the Elephant and Castle tube station in London, is we're now looking at more biodiverse plants. We're still choosing plants that can grow in a city as opposed to ones that we would like to grow, but we're also allowing plants to grow, go to seed, and then die, in other words, annuals, which we would have originally thought was not, let's say, client friendly, because the last thing you want to do is to pay a lot of money for a living wall, look at it, and half of it is like the picture there, gone all brown and is dying off. Now we're starting to see a bit more of an acceptance of that. And we're seeing it with the parks departments around the country that, and even in our own college here, we're putting the wildflower meadow out the front of the college, which was a bit of a battle, I can tell you. And this idea would be to make people more familiar that plants have a life cycle, just like we all do. And so, you have to accept that some of them will be dying, and then, but the following year they come back. And so we're not just rewilding or regreening the city, we're also bringing back the understanding that people might have of greenery in a city, and therefore become a little bit more acceptance of it, perhaps hopefully in their own gardens and so on. Interior living walls are again another speciality. The one on the bottom left is a green wall, but it's not living, it's a plastic one. So we have to be careful in this space that whilst everything looks great and it's doing a lot of, it's good, this is in the airport in Malta, in case you're wondering what that is, it's very good at sound absorption. But we can be sold a pig and a poke in this case. You can be sold a green roof, and it really is just astroturf or something like that. So there's other types of ways of, let's say, greening the city. We would favor a more living approach, because as I said earlier on, the living approach appreciates over time, and it can actually have benefits that we currently don't know or understand, or we may not even be aware of some of the benefits. And that's what all these research projects look at. They're trying to look at the evidence and trying to measure how effective they are. And as I mentioned earlier on, with the new ones that have just come out, those 4 that I showed, and the Go Green Routes, that's being led by an Irish consortium, global consortium, that they're looking at how do we measure the health and well-being, how do we measure those benefits, and how do we basically make sure that we're not just making exaggerated claims, we're proving that they exist. Because if they do, it means that we can actually bring them into society much better and much quicker, because they're funded by say, for example, HSE or something like that. I have this slide. I'm not going to go through it, but when you download, you can have this. It's just a little from Wageningen research, just looking at some of the examples of an indoor living wall. But what I want to draw your attention to is the very last one, which a lot of employers, when I've talked to them, hone in immediately. 20% of people report less sick people. In other words, 1.6 less sick days per person per year. This is from one study that was done in Wageningen in a large company in France, where sick days and where worker strife is quite common in terms of strikes and so on. So indoor nature-based solutions in France is really kicking off quite well, because they're realizing that it actually can be quite good in terms of keeping people happy with their comfort and comfortable in their work surroundings, as we all should be, I suppose. I'm going to briefly go through just a few little examples again of some of the types of nature-based solutions that are much more appropriate to our own situation. This doesn't look particularly brilliant, but what it's doing here is it's a very basic way of attenuating water before it enters the storm drains. The large picture, the one in Glasgow I talked about earlier on, but the large picture on the right is actually a playground. The playground is designed to flood. Ironically enough, the children have used the sustainable drainage system there for their BMX bikes, so it actually provides an additional solution that we never thought about, actually. I'm sure the designers hadn't. But what it does is it floods whenever there's an excess of water, and then that disappears down into this area. And so essentially we're almost sacrificing a bit of land in order to save flooding in private properties elsewhere. So it's a good idea. There's a few other examples of that. The hospital here in the bottom picture is just like the one I showed in Trinity. These are all little rain gardens, which are much more biodiverse and probably a little bit more architectural and more landscapey. So the landscape architects and architects in general are really looking to scale up the nature-based approach, because not only does it look very nice, but it also provides sometimes little solutions to sometimes more vexing problems. If you have a very large car park, for example, that's a lot of water to control. So rain gardens can be really good at and bioswales, like you see here, the slightly wet here at the top right. They can be really good at attenuating and removing excessive rainwater until the system can catch up. That's a photograph there from Trinity, where they haven't done a very obvious rain garden solution. And another type of very formal one in here in Pelletstown in Dublin, where you have different types of plants. Essentially, it looks like a dried up riverbed, and it's there essentially to assist in case the canal overflows in that part of Dublin. Ironically enough, unfortunately, all the downpipes from the apartments around it don't go into it. So we haven't really joined up our thinking in terms of the potential of nature-based solutions and the power that they can have. If we link them all up together, if this sustainable drainage system was then linked to a wetlands, then we would be able to construct a wildlife wetlands. And then we'd be able to, at each stage, of course, you're slowing the water down, you're allowing bacteria, you're allowing natural processes to detoxify it and to take salt out and to do different types of things and to allow it to permeate into the groundwater table. This is really a positive. It's a good way of reducing our dependence on stormwater systems exclusively. They can be done in pairs and have been done in pairs. So I really would be thinking this is a very, very good opportunity for places like Dublin, Cork, I mean, certainly in every city in Ireland, that to try and scale these type of nature-based solutions out. And there's just a few examples of different styles, very formal styles and very informal styles. As you can see here in the London borough of Barking and Dagenham, which is in London. There's this example there of form one. Oh, apologies for this quality of image. These nature-based solutions I talked about didn't come about by the local authority coming in and saying, we will do this for you. The local authority put a restriction on all developers in this area, saying, you cannot allow any water coming off this infrastructure to go into the River Thames. It has to be attenuated and slowed down. And the only way the developers could do it is to talk to the local authority, who began a co-design process with communities. This is a photograph of the school nearby where the other photograph is taken, where we had a community day where people essentially helped with the design of these types of nature-based solutions. And what was very interesting about it is we all grew up with the fear of open water, keep the children away and so on and so forth, and rightly so. But people realized that said, well, you know, we'll look after it. We'll make sure that that it's safe, and they have done. And in the meantime, it's become nicely biodiverse. Some of these water features, and we have research there that shows an increase in biodiversity that wasn't essentially planned for. We've taken that back to the community, and now the community are trying to design and build in other types of nature-based solutions all around the area, including the roof of that school, which is going to be made into a farm once, of course, protective barriers go up, obviously. In this innovation space, this is an example of a living structure which doesn't require to be put into the ground. This is one of our partners called Helix in Germany, and this is an example of a nature-based solution we did in our previous project, call it a living room, actually. And this is for cities that suffer from excessive heat and excessive noise. In the heel of the hunt with this one, when we were talking about it, I threw away a comment saying, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could throw that on the back of a truck and show it to communities by way of how nature can actually perform all these tasks. They took it on board, and that's what it looks like, by the way, after it's built. Very biodiverse, and totally self-sufficient. And it reduces the heat by about 2 to 3 degrees, even if you're not in the shade. So even just being nearby it in the full sun, the heat island effect is slightly lowered, which can very, very beneficial in countries and some European cities, especially when we hear about what's happening in the continent during the summertime. So I mentioned this could be taken around and shown to people, and so that's what we did. We put it on the back of a skip lorry and toured it around Europe, and it became so popular that in Germany, in Hamburg alone, they ordered 9 of them to drive to different communities to show people what a nature-based approach would be like. And currently there's like 15 of them touring around Germany at the moment. And so that became an innovation that company didn't particularly think was there. It was a benefit that wasn't exactly planned for. And out of this particular type of approach, we're now looking at different types of bus shelters and different types of other actions we could do. And we could definitely see this. I'm trying to get it to come to Ireland, but it's got to go through 2 countries, and we have to get plant licenses and all sorts of things. So we'll see about that. So just to finish up, just looking at some of the co-benefits of a nature-based approach. I hope I'm not going too late here, but draw the attention really to things like, let's just see if we can choose green over gray. Green infrastructure, it appreciates over time. Maybe, obviously there's going to be a need for gray infrastructure. We need places to park, but not all our gray infrastructure needs to be impermeable. It doesn't need to be sealed. We can have permeable surfaces which we can walk on and drive on, even cycle on. They still haven't got it right for wheelchairs and prams, but they're getting there. So there are ways to develop these things which allow us to take care of some of our big climate issues in cities, and we're all aware of flooding, but they can provide other co-benefits to cities in terms of greening areas in communities, where some communities like schoolyards and so on may not have the type of access to a green infrastructure that we would like. There are still challenges involved in it, and processes for city making. And I'm going to finish the demonstration. I'm just going to put this into the chat here. It's a link to the Connecting Nature website and the different innovations that we're doing. And I've got 4 or 5 here, and I'll finish off on that if that's okay. Hopefully I've not gone too far over time. So the first one is we've developed this different type of framework. I'm not going to go into this in great detail. You could visit these, and there will be downloadable PDFs in about 2 or 3 weeks' time. We've encountered a little glitch, so watch this space. You can download them for free whenever hopefully we get this repaired. We've developed a framework for working with cities and how cities can work together to scale out nature-based solutions. I know this image is rather sort of academic-y and not exactly self-explanatory, but we have a whole system where cities can actually reflexively monitor what they're doing within departments, and so try to get people out of their departmental thinking and try and cross over and then work with non-city agencies such as SMEs, such as NGOs like we have represented here today, and also working with the various people who can provide the evidence, who can provide the impact, the academic side that can actually measure whether these things are effective or not. This was the Urban by Nature program, was the one I was telling you about at the start, that we have. It was our way of dealing with the lockdown situation and of course the distance situation, and we have a series of webinars for building a grouping and hub in Brazil. This is just a screenshot of the Brazilian one, but there's also one for the Caucasus. We're actually at webinar 3, but these are all available on YouTube and are free to look at. Some of them may not be, and they're translated as well in the different languages, and they have English subtitles if we do need translation. And we have other types of innovations that are going on there. So for example, we're looking at a process called the Sarajevo process, which is one of our cities, about how do we tackle post-traumatic systems, post-conflict systems, by using nature as a way of building cohesion in a society. Really avant-garde thinking, and we're at the very early stages of that. Unfortunately, coronavirus knocked us back a few months on that. And I want to finish then just by, oh yes, I'm sorry, I just want to talk about, we have of course tools and different types of structures for, this is in Glasgow where we're looking at providing the evidence to planners and designers and to architects on like proximity to green infrastructure in terms of coronary heart disease, alcohol-related hospitalizations. So using existing data to show how effective having a green infrastructure or a nature-based solution nearby your house or apartment are, and therefore looking for the gaps. So we could do this in any city and look for the gaps, and I think it's quite a lot of people have been doing this type of thing, but matching it up to some of the existing data sets, if we can get access to them, in terms of proving to people that by having a park here, and this is in Glasgow, you can actually extend your life expectancy. We would expect you to extend your life expectancy by a certain number of years. And this is a strong argument for investing in nature-based solutions by the cities. But then what about the companies? Finishing off, we're about to launch next month a Connecting Nature Enterprise platform, or a nature-based enterprise platform. We have about 100 Irish companies that we surveyed, and since doing it, we found loads more. And it's basically a platform that companies that use nature as to provide their service, but also provide a service back to nature. In other words, they increase biodiversity, or they have a certain benefit back to nature. And there's quite a lot of them around. And we're looking at stimulating this space. We've designed business and finance models and a canvas, a business model canvas for nature-based solutions. And this particular platform is going to be animated by the various businesses themselves. And I'll finish with just a screenshot of an example of the Cork rooftop farm. I hope if someone is on the call from the Cork rooftop farm, you won't mind me unashamedly advertising. This is essentially a way of using a large space, an empty roof, to grow vegetables and to provide a market. So this is a classic example of a nature-based enterprise and how we innovate with nature in an urban area to realize the multiple wins of having greening a city, but then also having the benefits of providing a possible small and medium enterprise, startup companies, and at the same time providing access to things like fresh food, biodiverse systems, and essentially something nice to look at in many cases. So I will draw myself to a close there, because I could go on for quite a long time, and I'm conscious that we have some questions to ask. So I'd like to say thank you very much. And again, thank you so much for inviting me to give this presentation.
Thank you, Marcus. My name is Denise Cahill. I'm the Healthy Cities Coordinator and part of the interagency group that brought you this series here today. I think I'm taking great heart from, you know, the expression and the line that you said around that we have to reflexively monitor and step out of the department and silo thinking in relation to nature-based solutions. And that's very much what we're about in terms of this group, or this collaboration of bringing this series together. It's multi-agency, cross-sectoral, interdisciplinary. It's all those non-siloed approaches that we're trying to take, and we really want to look at action. So I'm going to encourage for the next few minutes people to put their questions to Marcus in the chat box. Also, any resources in terms of projects that might be going on in Cork or around Ireland that you'd like to share with everybody here. We'll save the chat at the end of this event, and we'll pull out the resources that people want to share. I'm now going to introduce you to one of our interagency partners for this series. We've heard from Frank from SHEP Earth Aware. We've heard from Maria from Green Spaces for Health. And now I'm going to pass you over to Paula Cogan, who's currently the president of Cork Chamber and the newly appointed CEO of Cognate Health, which has a national network of occupational health physicians, the first of its kind in Ireland. Prior to this, Paula was head of sales in the Doyle Collection, an Irish and international chain of hotels, which includes the Riverlea here in Cork. Paula has a very strong interest in sustainability and a passion for sustainable economic development of the Cork region to create a thriving city region for business, residents and visitors alike. Paula has a wealth of knowledge in business development and is a key voice within the Cork business community. So we're just going to hear some words from Paula in relation to this collaboration before we take questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Denise, and thank you, Marcus. That was absolutely fascinating. I think I'm somebody who has moved in the last 2 days from an office space that was in a basement to an office space that has windows and trees outside, and I can already feel it. It's making a difference. So I think it could be used as a testimonial for greening of a city, certainly from that perspective. It's an absolute pleasure to be involved in the webinar today from a Cork Chamber perspective. So I suppose just to give some context as to how the partnership came about and how Cork Chamber is so actively involved from a green perspective. I think traditionally people look at business and say we're not green and we're not interested in green activities, but that is not the case at all. Cork Chamber represents over 2,000 companies in the region with over 100,000 employees. I suppose really, if we take a step back, when I took over as Chamber President last year, we were celebrating our 200th anniversary, which was a very exciting time and an opportunity for us to look at what Cork Chamber means to the city. One of the projects we were involved in included the Glucksman Gallery in UCC, and it was a project called Future Forms, where we got 1,000 children from primary, secondary and third level schools in the city to come together and to give their impression of where they saw Cork in another 200 years. And I mean, the feedback was just phenomenal. It was a green city. It was diverse. It was inclusive. It was use of the water space. And the ambition that our young population had for the city was just phenomenal. So I suppose from there that actually, you know, I suppose the international green movement that was happening within the youth population at the time actually really resonated with us as well. And so as part of that, we decided from a Cork Chamber perspective that we would motivate our members through the SDGs, but also one of the first things we did was actually go out to that membership, that key membership in the city, and ask them what their priorities were. And number one, and thankfully number one still remains key, is attracting talent. What we want is high value jobs coming into the region, and we want young and dynamic people coming into the region who are really going to benefit our region as a whole. So effectively, business benefits hugely from greening. And as Maria mentioned, we were involved in as a result of COVID, just going out to our membership again and saying, look, what are your priorities now? Have they changed phenomenally? And they haven't. The top three priorities, again, within that membership remain connected transport, cycleways and greenways, and green spaces. So again, it just shows and resonates that while we're going through a very difficult time from a business perspective through COVID, actually those responsibilities and the quality of life remains number one and key. When talking to our membership, when you ask them what is different about Cork and what is unique about Cork, 57% of them tell us it's the quality of life. And that's where people are making decisions to come and live in our area. Interesting enough, we had a conversation with some of our board members just last week, and they're finding that a number of their key employees are saying that they don't want to be based in Dublin at the moment, and that Cork is really an attractive offering to them. So they're very interested in using this opportunity from a COVID perspective to look at basing themselves in Cork and other regions of Ireland. And you know, that's going to be something that's going to be interesting in the long run. We've also highlighted the need for higher density urban living, and with that actually comes that green spaces as well. It complements the plans, I think, again, and you know, we're very conscious that from a Cork perspective, Cork City Council are developing at their development plan at the moment, which is, you know, it's going to be transformational, we hope, in the next 5 to 6 years as well. So again, I suppose as Marcus alluded to earlier, greening is actually good for business. You know, it actually absolutely aligns with what our membership want to see and want to happen for their businesses as well into the future. We have called, as part of the Cork Chamber annual dinner, which was held in February, just pre-COVID, for Cork to view itself as the European capital, green capital in 5 years' time. And again, you know, to consider that 5 years ago and to consider that we would have those partnerships in play to have that happen was not going to happen. But certainly we feel now this is the time for the city, the region, employees, all of the stakeholders to come together and make that happen. I think from my perspective, having worked and lived in our city for a number of years, when we are all focused and single-mindedly focused on one ambition for a city, then that's when things happen. And groups come together and success can happen as well. So it is interesting, I suppose, from our perspective to think the future forums, it was our youth population who actually started this process for us. And as a result, we have put together the same Sustainable Cork programme. So again, it's framed around the SDGs. And what we've asked again from our Cork community, our business community, is to look at what they would like to see in Cork in 5, 10 and 30 years' time. It has to be a collaborative approach. There is no way that one of us can move this conversation forward for Cork. I suppose from a Cork Chamber perspective, again, we're a small organisation. We have 15 employees, but again, we've committed within our own organisation to look at the greening of the organisation itself, look at our building. It's a beautiful old building, but again, what can we do there? We've also committed to supplying 200 trees each year for the next 10 years to the city to support that innovation. And interesting enough, as part of our conversation about Cork over 200 years of Cork Chamber's anniversary, Cork Chamber was involved in the greening of the city initially and the developing of cultural attractions for the city. So it's something that we will continue to focus on for the next 5 to 10 years as well. So again, it's an absolute pleasure to be involved with this event today. And really, I suppose it's not just about speaking about this, it's actually putting actions and activity in play now that we can all move together. And again, thank you so much, Marcus. Thanks. I think it's really highlighted some key areas that we all need to focus on.
Thanks, Paula. Okay, I'm going to move on quickly to Paul Bolger in the ERI. Paul, we're a little bit behind, so I'll hand over to you. Paul is the manager of the Environmental Research Institute at UCC. He's worked across academia, industry and government for over 20 years, developing a long-term research solutions for global sustainable challenges. He's currently principal investigator on a number of research projects on climate change and the circular economy in University College Cork. And Paul, I'm just going to hand over to you for a few minutes, if that's okay.
Sure, Denise, thank you. And yes, I would certainly keep it brief. I see all the questions coming in the chat, so I want to leave some time for that. Thanks, Marcus, for an amazing presentation. It was beautiful to look at and inspirational. So I wish all our lectures and seminars were as beautiful as that. I'm reminded that I was out of UCC. I returned physically to UCC mid-May, and we had a lot of nature-based solutions, which nature had recovered itself around our building. So it doesn't take long for nature-based solutions to kick in. And I suppose, besides all the beautiful photographs you showed us, the thing that really struck me from our institute perspective, the Environmental Research Institute at UCC, where we bring different disciplines to work together, is this kind of quadruple helix structure you have for the project. You know, you've got the communities, you have the city, you have SMEs, you have academics. What Denise said as well is the idea of these stakeholder partnerships for implementing nature-based solutions is really critical. So that's a really wonderful aspect of the project, and I suppose I think that's very much in line with how this group works with SHEP, Earth Aware and Healthy Cities and Cork Environmental Forum. We really, in Cork Chamber, we have a wonderful groups in Cork now that are all working together and driven by some very, very talented people on the call today. So I think we're in a very strong position to drive forward and promote nature-based solutions in Cork City. So, and I look forward to kind of hearing from the rest of the people on the call today about that. So thanks, Denise.
Thanks a million, Paul, for being brief with that as well. Okay, I'm going to move on now. I'm going to try and keep an eye on the questions in the chat function. So please work away in terms of the questions. I have a few here that I've taken note of so far, and I'll keep connecting back in. So Marcus, I'm going to pose the questions to you. From your experience, Marcus, in the Connecting for Nature network, what do you think is necessary for a city like Cork to really become green? Now, green in a significant way. And what would you suggest would be the very first steps in that process?
So a simple question, is it? To start off with. No, I think first of all, we need a vision. I mean, we don't do anything unless we see it, unless we want to see it happening. And we need in other countries, and there was a question earlier on about other examples in Europe. It was Jim said a question earlier on what other examples. If you look at some of the other cities, and someone mentioned Copenhagen as well as a question, an example of rain, Bios Wales and so on. We see cities that have an elected mayor system. Okay, I don't want to open up a can of worms in Ireland here, but we see where there's a visionary person who wants to realize this. This is why we see everything going towards that direction. And I'm not talking about a green mayor or a mayor, but a mayor that has or a group of people in the city who are leading the city and saying, and as I heard a few seconds ago, we want the Chamber of Commerce saying, we want our city to be this. It's good for business, it's good for people. So the vision needs to be out there. And then that's when the innovation starts. That's when the exciting things start, because then if everybody agrees that that's what we want, then there's no end of people. And even we hear some of the responses here and the questions, no end of people who are going to provide those solutions. Where we start also, I think we need to hit the low-hanging fruit. And what are the big climate issues in our cities? And that's why I mentioned water a lot, because that's our big problem. But what's coming along the line is not just our water, but also incredibly dense cities. So noise and other types of, when we banned smoky fuels, everything went great. But now we're starting to see air quality getting poorer and poorer and poorer and poorer. And we're saying, well, hang on a second, we're not lighting fires anymore. Why is this? Well, it's because our cars and our combustibles are getting more complex chemicals. So noise and pollution would be the next stage. But I think really where we need, or Ireland needs its toe out of the water is flooding, and not only coastal inundation, but also episodic flooding, as we've experienced. You've experienced it in Cork, we've experienced it in Dublin, and every small town, village in Ireland has had some relevant thing like this, where we have this huge deluge. And because of where we built, because we've chosen to build and how we've chosen to build, we're funneling this and we're sealing our soils. We need to just let's do retrofitting of certain areas to begin with. We can also be talking about our parks. And Amandine, I think I saw earlier on, mentioned about derelict sites. And I was going to say, these are ways that we can provide pop-up green infrastructure, pop-up sites. We saw during the downturn, people complaining that there were too many people in the park. I can't go for a walk, keep social distancing because there's too many people in the park. That's the wrong thing. What we should be saying is there's not enough parks for people. And that's where these like empty spaces, temporarily empty spaces, can be used to provide this type of small pocket parks, preferably close to communities that who are disadvantaged or don't have, or communities who are for elderly people. Whilst they may have a park in front of them, the gate might be a quarter of a kilometre around the other side. And they say, to hell, I'm not going to walk up. By the time I get there, I'm going to walk back because it's too far. So we need to be thinking strategically and look at the spaces we have, the spaces that we want to have, and then have a little bit of a vision on top of all that.
And just to point out here, a comment from Kevin Ryan in Cork City Council, great presentation. The green walls concept is a very easy win in terms of creating a green space, perhaps vertically rather than horizontally. These green walls have multiple purposes: biodiversity enhancement, noise abatement, aesthetic, as well as air quality enhancement. From a Cork City Council point of view, we're in the process of developing an air quality strategy for the city. Nature-based solutions and air quality will form an essential element of improving air quality. So that's a very positive sign that there is action actually taking place here in Cork. So thanks for that, Kevin. We've had a question here from a planner. Thank you for the presentation. Any suggestions where I can source case studies or executive summaries of a holistic cost-benefit analysis on the multiple benefits of low-maintenance NBS, nature-based solutions, which are financially cheaper to develop than concrete solutions? So he's looking for something very concrete, pardon the pun, to make his case there. Yes,
and this is why we're doing these projects actually. So in some of the projects that you have the link to, There are downloadable resources such as technical specifications. Our slight difficulty is that from a planner's point of view, some of the data that would prove it are held privately. They're held by those companies who make money out of it. The living roof people, the living wall people, etc., the constructed wetlands, because they develop the technology themselves. They're hardly going to go around telling everybody about it and then have a get competition that they will want. So it's difficult to get very, very specifics. One of the projects that's in there called NIAID, N-A-I-A-D, I can't remember, is led by the insurance companies, and they have a lot of downloadable resources on risk and benefits. The economic side, there's a task force in the European Commission that I'm part of, and we're very close to putting the economics out there. But I have to keep saying this, it's a moving field. So every time we do a study and we get the information, the technology's moved on and there's more of it. So we're not really able to get a very accurate cost benefit analysis. There are case studies in the different projects that show the cost and benefits of living roofs. I saw someone mentioning about the living roof organization, the Dusty Gauges organization, group of companies. They have information at companies like Scottscape, which in Scotland and so on. However, it's more difficult for a member of the community, but I think a planner may be able to approach these organizations saying, sorry, we're thinking of doing something in our city. Can you give me some proof, please? They're more likely then to share that with you than they are with the general members of the public and potential competitors. So that pages, hopefully you can get that, and you can, some of them will have concrete examples and also cost benefits. The World Bank and the European Investment Bank are also in the process of doing more economic analysis on this, and that'll be available by Christmas, we're hoping.
Great stuff. Just 2 more questions, if that's okay, Marcus. Do you think that measures to green the city can make a serious contribution to food security?
I do. Actually, I wouldn't have done that in the past, being someone who kind of grows my own as much as I possibly can, and realize that, you know, one day of harvesting, everything is gone. But what we're seeing are the companies that are actively, that Green Dublin, the rooftop growers in Cork that I just showed that slide at the very end. There are a lot of these types of companies, social hops, different groups who are growing enough to be self-sufficient in a very specific, let's say, a niche area. So you can grow a tremendous amount of a certain type of thing, which may not be, you won't eat all that garlic in 1 year. So that's something that could be done. Some of the more staples now, you know, rice and all that, now that's not going to happen in the city because we need more space for that. But there's a lot of other people talking about what might seem like crazy things like insect growing and going back to eating guinea pigs as they do in South America and things like that, which may not be palatable to everybody. But for certain countries, that is a very viable nature-based solution because it's also culturally appropriate to those locations. So we're not seeing a one-size-fits-all, but we are definitely seeing, being that they're building it in Paris and it's actually being physically built, not done as an afterthought, it's part of a building project. We're seeing it being done in other cities as well. So growing vegetables and it's simply, I think, to do with security of supply and huge consumer demand for locally available food produce. So that's, I've got 2 of my students who are snail farming because of this.
Thanks for that. There's a comment here just from Helen about gardens. Why are developers, I mean, this probably is a more comment than a question. Why are developers still allowed to dictate the size of gardens in new developments? You couldn't swing a cat in so many of them nowadays, not to mind grow enough food to feed a family. If private gardens are to be small, then every development should have a community garden and developers should be making room for them. So that's just a comment.
And I would 100% agree with that. And I really think that this is where you are the consumer. This is you. You're the one who demands this. This isn't like, here's a house, go live in it and to hell with you. You are the consumer. You have the choice. You say, I'm not buying that house unless it's a company buy. And you've got a lot of local representatives who are now listening and maybe have dialed into this call, but there are representatives who are realizing that this is actually the way we do things for our community, not just all fixing potholes all the time. And there's other ways to provide allotments, to provide shared conflict areas, to provide, and as Paula mentioned about providing things like trees and so on, there's plenty of people who are wanting to help. Milk it, find a way to do that, because if you demand it as your city, it's not, I'm living in Dublin, but my city is Dublin, so we demand this, and if enough people say it, enough people get it.
Definitely, as Paula referred to earlier, the engagement that the Chamber did, a lot of people were saying that they want more green spaces, they want more spaces for growing. So there is definitely a demand. Maria would see it with the green spaces for health as well. And there is some discussion there in the chat box about some particular spaces that maybe we could look at in terms of developing green spaces. So that's fantastic. Thanks for contributing that. Maybe just a final question, and it's something that's, you know, of huge interest, and something I suppose I learned during a placemaking training in the summer is that one of the largest recreational spaces in our city is our river, the River Lee. And we have a tendency to forget that it's a recreational space. And the question here is making the city blue as important as making the city green? And do you think there are ways that Cork could make good use, not only of the Lee itself, but also of all the tributaries that flow into it within the new city boundaries?
Oh, absolutely. So we use the phrase green infrastructure, but a lot of people have turned to using blue-green infrastructure. Mainly these are the Dutch people where there's a lot of blue. But most definitely, there's absolutely no reason why the river just has to be a way of removing excess water from the land. There's plenty of co-benefits that can happen in the intervening process. We see there's different types of sporting activities, kayaking and canoeing and so on, that can be done on it, but there's other ways. And so some of our collaborators in other cities, they have floating island structures to remove pollution and to provide islands for nesting and other types of things at different scales. Some of them are very small, but I've seen ones that are actually quite big. They don't interfere with the flowing of the river. They go up and down with the river. They do the business with it. So there are ways that we can actually incorporate the river. And in Poznan, for example, is a city in Poland that doesn't have a sea. It has a huge big river which you cannot swim in. It's so fast flowing, and it's also freezing cold, as I found out. But what they do every year is they bring out beaches. They put out beaches beside the river, as you've seen in other European cities, and then they bring them all back in the winter and store them away. What's interesting is the Poznan City Council started off by doing this as an altruistic thing, and they paid for it. But then with the companies that came along who are providing coffees and teas and ice creams and other types of services, they found that those companies, with a very small subvention, we're able to pay for it. And now the city doesn't pay for the beaches at all. It's paid for and it's 100% publicly open. So there's no privatized areas whatsoever. And now we're starting to see more water-based activities developing because of that. So here we see a public-private partnership going on. We see communities involved in it, and we see co-benefits that we didn't see before. Now, I'm not saying we should bring beaches down to Cork. Whatever you do, that's not the takeaway sentence from the guy from Trinity said we should put beaches. Not saying that at all. But that's the type of nature-based innovation we should be thinking. Yeah. And that's cultural and local specific. That's something that would be specific to Cork or perhaps to Ireland, and not necessarily to other European countries. So we can find these. And the way we do this is through the co-creation or the co-design process, where we don't just talk to people and get ideas. We actually involve them physically in decision-making process in a more just and democratic way.
Brilliant, Marcus. Thank you. I'm just going to finish with a final comment there from Fergal Reedy in Cork City Council, who is overseeing the Cork City Development Plan process. He said, great presentations, and thanks, Marcus. Appreciate all the comments that have come in. Cork City Council has commissioned a blue and green infrastructure study that will feed into the city development plan. We also intend to plan more nature-based solutions, which is great to hear. all intended to make the city a more livable and healthy city. So I think that ends the discussion piece on a very positive note. And what I would be saying to everybody
hold them to
here,
that now.
yes, it's in writing now, Fergal.
In writing.
Yeah, we're
We've all
going
seen
to
it.
we're going to save this chat.
So that's what I meant by a vision. That's a vision. That's exactly the type of thing we need. And
that's where you start.
We need to action it now. That's the thing.
Absolutely. And in terms of action, and that is very much what this interagency collaboration in Cork is very much about. For those of you that are based in Cork, and we do have international members here as well who are very welcome as well to the discussion, and thank you for sharing your expertise. But for those of you based in Cork that are interested in the action side of this, you all have my email address because I've emailed you all the link to be here today. We'd be delighted to hear from you. Maria Young, who is the Green City, the Green Spaces for Health Coordinator, would also be very keen to hear from you. If you do want to get involved, if you do have ideas that you want to share with us, we do want to look at action. We don't want this seminar series to be a talk shop. We want it to be based around action. So we'd be very keen to hear from you. I'm going to hand back now to that very famous person, Maria Young, just to finish us off for this afternoon. And thank you very much, Marcus, for the discussion.
Thanks very much, Denise. Yeah, just to add to that, if you have any suggestions for topics for future presentations or speakers that you think would be beneficial for this series, don't hesitate to email us either at greenspacescork@gmail.com or shepearthaware@gmail.com. And don't forget to put into your diary Tuesday, October the 20th, 2:30 p.m. for Trevor Hancock's presentation. And finally, a massive thank you to Marcus for such an inspiring presentation. You've given us so much really to think about and consider. And thank you for giving us your slides as well. We'll make those available to everyone shortly. And thank you, Denise, Paula, Paul, Frank, Eileen Lynch of SHEP Earth Aware, and Elders for Earth. Thanks to Michelle O'Sullivan from the Cork Chamber, to our technical hosts, Lisa Dennehy and Vicky O'Connor from Cork Chamber. Thank you, Alan Gray from the CEF, to you, the participants, and all who made this happen. See you next month. Thank you.